Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're taking a deep dive into something that's honestly fascinating, the intersection of local commercial real estate deals and our massive, completely unseen civic infrastructure. It's really easy to look at a new commercial building and just see bricks, mortar, maybe some nice glass. But behind the scenes, these developments are plugged into this colossal, incredibly complex web of resources. We're going to be unpacking a recent commercial real estate market report from Hoff and Lee, which actually uses a major local development to break down exactly how the power grid works.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand the dynamics of our local market, we'll start with the real estate outlook, move into the data center dilemma, explore how power is made, sold, and distributed, and then we'll wrap it all up with the bottom line.
Section 1. Commercial Real Estate Outlook. Let's ground ourselves in the current state of the market based on the source report.
So the report gives us a very candid look at the environment right now. The author notes that, yeah, the market is a bit slower to the finish line these days, but deals are absolutely still getting done. Savvy experts are out there pushing transactions forward. We're talking off-market retail deals, a property at Platt and Academy, plus various industrial condos and office leases. It's kind of like a giant puzzle, and it's a market that rewards expertise and, above all, patience. And this ongoing commercial activity? Well, it leads us directly to a major local case study that literally has everyone talking.
Section 2. The Data Center Dilemma. This brings us to the main event, our inciting incident, Project Taurus. Right, so Project Taurus is a proposal for a massive data center, but what makes this uniquely relevant to commercial real estate is that it's designed to be housed entirely inside an existing commercial building, so they aren't doing sprawling, from-scratch new construction. However, dropping a facility with massive energy needs right smack in the middle of a city naturally sparks a ton of community concern regarding local resources. I mean, what actually happens to the grid when a giant just moves in?
And that brings us to the central conflict of our explainer today. Will a massive commercial user like Project Taurus cause our local utility bills to just skyrocket? The source report points out that people are understandably worried, but to find the true answer, we really have to strip away the politics and the assumptions. We need to look at the cold, hard facts of how the power grid actually operates. Section 3. How power is made. Let's see how this all builds from the ground up.
The author uses a fantastic analogy here. Imagine the power grid is just a giant bathtub where the water never ever stops draining. Everyone, from a massive hotel downtown to the laptop you might be using right now, is constantly draining water out. To keep the city running, the local utility, Colorado Springs Utilities in this case, has to constantly fill that tub. Locally, they have about 10 filling stations that can pump a maximum of 1,230 megawatts of power into the tub at any given moment, just to meet that constant, non-stop demand.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how those filling stations work. For traditional power plants like coal or natural gas, it comes down to a surprisingly simple four-step trick. You burn something to create intense heat. You boil water using that heat. That creates highly pressurized steam. And then that steam shoots through pipes to spin a massive fan, which we call a turbine. The spinning of that fan is what actually generates the electricity.
Now, it's definitely worth briefly contrasting this with renewable energy. Solar panels, they skip the fan entirely, turning direct sunlight straight into power. But hydro plants still rely on spinning that massive fan. In fact, the report notes this really fascinating detail. Water coming down Pikes Peak hits the local hydro plant fans at something close to jet engine velocity. I mean, that is just incredible. But regardless of how you spin the fan, that power eventually has to enter the economic market.
Section 4. How power is sold. Let's shift gears and look at the economics of supply and demand for giant commercial developments.
Now, what's really interesting here is the ratio. The local utility produces about 80% of the power its customers need using its own local plants. But what about the other 20%? Well, that remaining slice is purchased from an outside market. Understanding this 80-20 split is absolutely crucial. It's the key to understanding why a massive data center doesn't necessarily just drain your personal power supply.
So that 20% slice comes from the Southwest Power Pool, or SPP. Now, the SPP doesn't actually own any power plants. Instead, think of it as a massive, nonprofit air traffic controller for electricity. It manages this extensive grid spanning 17 states, carefully directing power across a shared network of lines so that electricity lands exactly where it's needed without any gridlock or collisions.
To give you a sense of the sheer scale of this market, the SPP coordinates 105 billion watts of power. 105 billion. The author of the report makes an incredible comparison here.
There are roughly 100 to 200 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy. So, to put that into perspective, the number of watts available in this regional market is practically on par with the number of stars in our entire galaxy.
So here is the crucial mechanism. When a massive user like Project Taurus needs power, let's say 50 million watts, that power isn't carved out of the 80% local production that runs your house. No way. Instead, the local utility goes out to that massive SPP market, purchases the power specifically for the data center in advance, and then resells it to the data center at a retail profit. The city makes money, and your piece of the local power pie, it remains entirely untouched.
Section 5. How power is distributed. Let's take a quick power field trip and see how those purchased electrons physically travel to these commercial buildings. The report uses this great electric train analogy to explain the journey. Stop 1 is the high-voltage express. A transformer at the power plant cranks the electricity way up so it can travel long distances. Stop 2 is the transmission lines. You know, those giant metal towers you see out on the prairie carrying the express train? Stop 3 is the substation, where the train has to slow down from bullet train speeds to city street speeds. Stop 4 is the local tracks, the normal poles and wires in your neighborhood. And finally, stop 5 is the final transformer, which steps the power down one last time so it safely enters your wall outlet without blowing up your TV.
And here is exactly why this matters for commercial real estate developments. The local utility already maintains 3,800 miles of that local track. When a new commercial project comes along, the city doesn't have to build a brand new express train system from scratch. The city's approval process simply checks to ensure that the existing local trolley tracks right near the site can handle the extra load.
Section 6. The bottom line. Let's bring all these mechanics back to Project Taurus and look at the final economic impact.
It's important to look at the author's economic argument regarding why power bills actually go up. According to the report, power will cost more in the future not because a local data center is tapping into the 80% local supply, but due to global supply and demand limits. The author also argues that policies pushed by green energy advocates have forced the closure of lower-cost power providers, and in their view, that reduces the overall supply and drives up prices on the broader market.
When we look specifically at Project Taurus, the report highlights a surprisingly small physical footprint. Because it's taking over an existing commercial building, environmental disruption is seriously limited. Furthermore, it uses a closed-loop cooling system. This means it only uses a nominal amount of water, literally the equivalent of filling 1.5 YMCA swimming pools just once.
So the crucial point here is the financial upside. This single commercial project is projected to generate the property tax equivalent of 720 median-priced homes. And it does this on a fraction of the land that 720 houses would require. That means substantially less intrusion on the local ecosystem while bringing in massive value.
But actually, that's not even all. The report reveals a staggering figure: $115 million. That is the potential use tax the city stands to collect if this commercial project is approved. The author points out that this is essentially forever money that the city could use for absolutely critical infrastructure. We're talking funding the police, fixing potholes, and maintaining parks and trails.
Which leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought from the author. If community protests, perhaps driven by a misunderstanding of how the power grid actually works, become too overbearing, the developers might just walk away. So the question you really have to ask is, will protesting this development, without truly grasping the underlying mechanics of the grid, end up costing the city a massive, generational financial windfall? It's a fascinating look at how commercial real estate, infrastructure, and community interests all collide. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and hey, always keep questioning how the world around you actually works.